What do you think?
I think we're dead meat. Real dead meat.
You dead meat! Go ahead and laugh, you guys. If I ever find little bastards that did this, they're dead meat.
Welcome to the Dead Meat Podcast, an extension of the YouTube channel Dead Meat. I'm James.
I'm Chelsea, and we're boyfriend and girlfriend, and we like to get scared together.
Yeah.
And have special guests on our show.
Yeah, this is Nicholas McCarthy. Hey, Nick.
How you guys doing?
Good.
Oh, man, we're so excited. Nicholas just directed The Prodigy.
Miles is dangerous.
I don't feel safe with him in the house.
Will you always love me? No matter what I do.
Yeah, so we saw The Prodigy. We're not allowed to talk about it until it comes out, so that's all we can say.
Yeah.
It's going to be a lot of silence.
Yeah, just like,
We're all going to
us.
sit here. Yeah, it's an hour podcast of us sitting and thinking about The Prodigy.
Right.
I think we can tell people to go see it, though.
Yeah.
Go see it.
I think that's the point.
I think, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and Taylor Schilling from Orange is the New Black is in it.
I want you to tell me everything that you remember.
I don't remember anything.
So your first film was The Pact?
That's right, yeah.
And that was 2012, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then At
the Devil's Door.
2015, I think.
2014.
2014, got it. And then you did a segment in that Holidays movie, which is available on Netflix to watch. You did the Easter segment, the third one.
Yeah, some of you tweeted at me saying that scared you
Oh my
very
God.
badly. And yes,
great.
it is the creepiest shit.
He's so creepy.
Loved it.
That's what everyone says about me.
Yeah, you're just so creepy. I'm actually curious before we get into like talking about the movies, just a little background about yourself and like
Right.
how you got into filmmaking. Did you expect to be a horror director, or did that just kind of come to you?
No, yes, that's what I always wanted to do.
Yeah.
You know? And I started watching movies on TV, on UHF channels that were like, the only ones that would come through in the small town in New Hampshire that I grew up in.
Oh.
And I saw, Tarantula, about the giant tarantula, and Them, about the giant ants. And then I watched a bunch of made-for-TV movies.
Kim Darby has inherited this house from her grandmother. But the house has some secrets.
Don't Be Afraid of the Dark and Trilogy of Terror. Those films all kind of rattled me and made me really interested in whatever this whole world of horror was. And then by the time I got to be old enough to go see movies in theaters, which was, in the 80s, and it was a really good time for horror movies. Mm-hmm. And then I had saved up money to get my first VCR. And there was just that crazy, weird world of movies on VHS tape where you didn't really know exactly what you were going to get. There wasn't the internet for context. And there also weren't many people that I knew that were into it, like really no one. So there was a lot of these films that I kind of discovered on my own, either watching them, in a theater by myself at a revival screening or a new horror film, or, something that I had rented. I was just hanging out again with Joe Bishara, who did the music for The Prodigy, and we were kind of, talking about how we had these really similar childhoods. And it's the kind of childhood that I think a lot of horror fans had, where, you'd go to the video store and, like I would rent, a horror movie that I had never seen, a horror movie that I had seen, and then like, something really bizarre like a Doris Wishman movie or some kind of, 60s sexploitation movie. And then like a episode of The Twilight Zone or The Outer Limits. And I'd be like, okay, can I watch all of this in one night? You know? And so it was this kind of self-education. And all through that, I was making movies. I made Super 8 films and then films on video. And then I went to film school at SUNY Purchase, State University of New York at Purchase.
So I did ballet programs there growing up.
They have a great dance program.
Yep. I went there. I stayed there a summer and like did that whole like intensive.
Wow.
Yeah, I have very fond memories of SUNY Purchase.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay. Where'd you grow up? Did you grow up in?
No, I'm from Michigan. We're both from Michigan.
Oh, okay, right on.
But it was just it's such a good dance program that like
Right.
people from all over the world came there actually.
Yeah. Well, the film program was really interesting. It was really small. There probably in all 4 years were like 40 students or something like that. And I learned a lot there. I guess I was already making films by the time I got there. But what that kind of provided me with was like a place for like to not work, to have a normal job and just to make stuff. And all through that time, even though the kind of films that I was making in film school were probably the kind of cliched stuff that like, you know, white guys who go to film school make, you know.
I've been there.
They were like these kind of fake Antonioni movies or something like that with student actors. But I was always obsessed with horror films. And so I came to LA in 2000, and I didn't know how to, how movies got made. You know, it was this mystery. But I knew I loved to make movies, and so I started this film club with some friends of mine, and we would it was kind of a challenge where we would, each of us would write a 5-page script, and then we would put our names in a hat, and then you pull out someone else's name, and you had to make a script out of that person's thing. Or
like you'd actually film the other person's script? Oh,
yeah.
Okay. That's
Although
great
none
practice.
of us ever really like stayed that it was kind of an excuse, just that, you know, to then we had to make a film. We had we had 6 weeks and we were going to deliver something. And it was the film club was called Alpha 60, and we did it in Echo Park. And I think I made 13 short films that way, one after the other, because I didn't know, like, you know, other people are they are probably savvier than I was, where they would like get a job at a production company or at an agency or something. And but I just knew that I was happiest when I was making films. And those movies, like, none of them were really horror films, but a lot of them had this kind of disturbed vibe or something that I would put in them. And I began to go to film festivals, played my first short at a film festival. And then I made a much more elaborate short film, which played at Sundance. And that film was a comedy, but it was a comedy that had like a zombie Christ in it in one sequence. So that stuff, like my kind of lifetime obsession with horror films, was always there, you know? And after going to Sundance, that was kind of this moment that sort of activated me to say, I'm not going to just make short films in my apartment anymore with my friends. I'm going to see if I can actually really do this. And I began to write screenplays. And of course, the first screenplay that I wrote was a horror film, and it was kind of, it really was inspired by looking at other, horror directors that were people like John Carpenter and George Romero, who had made films that were, written for their budgets, but were super intense. Mm-hmm. And that movie, it took place at a rest stop. It never got made. And it was about this girl who discovers this severed head that's in this box. And that script ended up kind of being, in some ways, like the door opened just a little bit. And I had a few meetings. But it really wasn't until I went back with another short to Sundance 5 years later. And it was the short film of The Pact.
No. I don't believe in God.
And you don't believe in ghosts?
Here's something that's interesting to me. I want to tell this story. It was like a 10-page script. I had no business spending another $5,000 of credit that, I shouldn't be spending. But that's what I did, and that movie got into Sundance. And because that thing did something different than the other ones did, which is that it embraced this kind of horror atmosphere, which I had been putting in kind of non-genre stuff all along. Mm-hmm. But the Pact short film, which you could see someone put it on YouTube. Oh. I had put it on, I think I have, my Vimeo has it up there. And I think it's an interesting movie. It's like the first half is this kind of intense character thing with this brother and sister, and then the second half is this ghost story. And that was the moment when I saw that movie with an audience at Sundance. They played it before, one of the midnight films, and I was sitting at that Egyptian theater on Main Street, and there was this scene in the movie where the actress was Jewel Staite. She's this, people know her from Firefly, the Joss Whedon show. Yeah. And she was a friend of a friend. She agreed to be in this thing. And there's this whole scene people could see it online. It's like the last moment of the movie is her walking towards this door. And I had, in the sound mix, everything cut out, except it's just like her breathing and some of her footsteps and stuff. and you could just feel in an audience that everyone was like, "Oh fuck," you know. And it was because of that moment that I met with some people who said, "We want to make a movie," and they said, "Clearly, this is like a spec for a feature that you've written, because it ends very ambiguously." And it wasn't like, but I lied and I said, "Yeah, there's a script," and I went and wrote it, and then gave it to them, and it took about five or 6 weeks to write. And then within 2 months, we were like casting it and making the movie.
Oh wow, that's pretty fast
so
turnaround.
fast.
Yeah. And the movie, the feature film does like have, that's kind of like the beginning of it, and then it continues onward from that. If I'm thinking correctly, the woman walking towards the door.
All the stuff where it's just slow zooms towards doors and down hallways, always, it just, that never fails to give me anxiety. And it reminds me, because you talked a little bit about having, kind of non-genre stuff and a bit more, not traditional horror, but it felt, I don't know, I feel a little bit of David Lynch in there, where it's just the dread of going
like
down hallways,
yeah.
and just, I think of, like, this is always an example I use of like something that scares me the most is the Winky's Diner thing, where it's just the fear of what's around the corner.
It's amazing that you say that, because I think that scene in that movie in Mulholland Drive was one of the most kind of influential things for me.
I just wanted to come here.
To Winky's?
This Winky's.
Okay. Why this Winky's?
I had a dream about this place.
And that scene kind of, for me, kind of hatched this scheme about how to write a short film that I used in The Pact, and I'd used it for the first time in a short that is also online called Chinese Box, which is not a genre film, but it deals with this kind of, it's about this dysfunctional relationship, but it has this kind of bizarre science fiction element to it. But also the Easter short film that I did.
Yeah.
It's the same idea, which is that you set something up with a conversation where someone is claiming something that is like impossible.
Yeah.
And because you're sitting watching a movie, you're like, well, maybe this is real. Like maybe this is going to be real.
Well, honey, just close your eyes and go to sleep. And tomorrow you are going to wake up and there will be candy chicks and eggs and yummy stuff.
But what if I'm awake when he comes? What if I get up and get a glass of water?
It's okay to get a glass of water.
No, but what if he's here?
And by the way, there's a weird connection there, because they made a sequel to The Pact, which I've never actually seen it.
Oh, really?
But the one of the actors in it is one of the actors in the scene from that movie.
Oh, is it the guy who gets
Patrick?
scared?
Yeah, the guy who has.
Also in Mad Men.
He's also from Mad Men.
Yeah, Lost. Yeah, he's a great character actor.
Great character actor.
Yeah,
and I got to meet him because when they made The Pact 2, like literally the day before, it was like going to be their last day of shooting, and I was kind of drunk at a bar the night before with a friend of mine who had produced the short film of The Pact, and I was like, just staring off into space and saying, "They made a sequel to a movie I made. This is the weirdest thing." And then I said, or maybe my buddy said, "We just got to go to the set and see it." So the next morning we got up and we drove to set, and that guy was working. And I was like, "Oh, thank you for this weird life moment that I'm having."
Wait, I'm actually kind of curious about that. Them making a sequel with, it sounds like without your involvement.
Dude, that's how you know you've made it, though.
I know, right?
Like, we're taking this from you now.
It's an honor. I mean, it really is.
Like the birds too.
The birds too.
Oh my God.
Yeah. That's so funny. That's a late sequel.
Yeah.
I mean, it was an honor like that they made The Pact 2, and I met the directors. It's a directing team, Dallas and Patrick went on to do one of the shorts in Southbound, the anthology, and I thought he did a great job with that. And like it just for me was this, it was like this weird thing where it's like, if I was to ever watch that movie, it would be equivalent of like, if someone like took my kid and like took them on a vacation without me, and I didn't even really know who that person was, and I'd be like, "Here's some pictures of this," and I'd be like,
"I get the anxiety of that." Yeah.
There's other things there's other movies I'd rather watch. But
did any cast members return, or was there any?
Yeah, apparently Katie was in it. Actually, the three principals are in it. Katie has a small role in it. I never talked to her about that. Mark Steger, who played Judas.
Okay.
He returned.
And you said he plays the Demogorgon in Stranger Things?
Yeah,
right?
he went on to play the Demogorgon, and then Haley, who plays the blind girl, Haley Hudson, who was just so amazing in the Pact.
Yeah.
They brought her back. It's just so strange, you know.
Yeah, like you wrote those characters.
I might I don't know, someday.
Mm-hmm. No,
Right.
I totally get, the weird apprehension to, watching it and facing it. It would just be very, very out of body, I think.
Right. I think I'll do it with people.
Yeah.
maybe.
Right. We need a support system. But speaking of all the actors, like I was kind of saying earlier, there's so many awesome women in your movies, which I thought was so cool watching through them. And I think that's a big trademark too of horror is it's a genre where women get to be main characters and it's not a big deal. I think I didn't even realize it until I kind of sat and thought about it. Like, oh yeah, all these movies are women's stories, but I don't feel like it's a gimmick, right?
Yeah, that it's exceptional.
Just,
Well, it's interesting to think about that because then you could play the opposite game and think, what are the horror movies about men? And there aren't as many films that are horror movies about men in, like, I guess the modern era, like, when we started telling stories in a different way, like maybe starting in the 60s,
Mm-hmm.
But there is a kind of horror movie about men, and there's a few different examples of it. Sinister was one of them.
Oh, yeah.
Angel Heart was another one. Don't Look Now was another one. And if you really kind of deconstruct those movies a little bit, they're actually about kind of masculinity being challenged, like where it's like, am I going to be able to hold my family together?
My family, yeah.
Don't. Your daughter.
My daughter has a father who loves her, who is always around, who encourages her to be herself. All right, the worst thing that has ever happened to her is one time she moved into a house where a family was killed. She found out about the murders, all right, so she felt sorry for the little girl, so she painted a fucking picture.
Your movies also have a lot of religious stuff going on, which I'm a big fan of. I think the last episode we were talking about how often it is that horror directors and writers end up having grown up Catholic, and
I did. I grew up Catholic.
Yeah.
And actually, the first time I saw The Exorcist, I saw it on a Betamax tape that, I'm not joking, a kid named Damien showed it to me.
I think you're really going to love it.
I had a friend in 6th grade named Damien.
Sixth grade?
And, yes. And, that movie, because it had so much imagery of priests, which was, was part of my life, going to mass every Sunday, and that my parents were very Catholic. It felt so real to me, that movie, and of course that was the whole aesthetic of the film, is that is this sense of realism. I was just shattered by it, and I couldn't make it beyond. It was probably about the hypnotism scene. I had to have Damien shut it off because it was so troubling to me. And when I actually read the script for The Prodigy, there is this hypnotism scene that's in the trailers. And I realized it was now, this chance to kind of pay homage to that moment, because really, like, the first hour of The Exorcist is the one that I love. It's when Ellen Burstyn is trying to kind of figure out what's happening with her daughter, and the kind of disintegration that's happening in that family, and also Jason Miller's character being so kind of morally tormented. Like, that's the stuff that still really appeals to me. But when I was a kid, just seeing people, like seeing the Catholic Church cast in this light where it was like just this feeling of kind of dread and doom, it really scarred me, because I guess I had my own questions about going, what I was absorbing, witnessing at Mass every Sunday. And so, it eventually made its way into the movies. And in the Prodigy, it's almost an Easter egg, because what I liked about the Prodigy, without giving it away too much, like, and I think a lot of the way that, because they've kept the movie a secret, a lot of the way people have kind of talked about it online when they're just describing what they see in the trailers is they think it's a possession movie. They think it's a movie about the devil possessing this kid. And I can understand why they feel that way, because it's like we were kind of drawing on all those tropes that The Exorcist used, you know? But for me, like, this was actually a chance to get away from this Catholic shit. But then also to take a kind of supernatural, and, you know, it's inside this film without giving too much away, a religious belief that is different than Catholicism, different than Christianity, but is, you know, for billions of people is just as real, you know. So I'll be curious. I'll give anyone $5 if they can spot the Catholic thing that I put in this movie.
Oh yeah, yeah. You told it to us before we started, so we won't reveal it. That's another thing I really like about your films is the way you work in the supernatural. Because, like, as a complete skeptic, you know, I don't. If a movie's based on something supernatural, it definitely doesn't bother me. Like, I buy into what that is in the movie. But your movies have a tendency, and I'm thinking of The Pact especially, to like really ground that supernaturalism, and to like, I just like how in The Pact it's not the crux of it. Like, it's not
that
like
kind
the
of
big
blew my
reveal.
mind, actually.
Yeah,
where it's like just a fact of that universe the movie takes in, but it's not like the big surprise of the movie, you know, or it's not the big,
like the big evil,
the big
thing.
bad of the movie. It just is a fact of that life.
It kind of lets you have it both ways of like having that spooky supernatural stuff, but then there's also the real fear when something's very real, like with the strangers or other, like, oh, it could happen to you. Like, you get to have both of those in the
it's
Pact.
kind of like a Reese's peanut butter cup, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's how I saw it, is like with The Pact, it was kind of like that it would be a kind of, you know, be a ghost story movie like The Changeling or a J-horror film that then would turn into a slasher movie, essentially, right? And that's because while that kind of metaphysical, you know, horror of you know, a paranormal threat is delicious and something I love, at the end of the day, the thing that we fear is other people, you know. And so I always was curious, I guess, when I was making the movie, about how that was going to play, if that was going to be a disappointment. But it seems like for most people who were into that movie, that reveal that we're passing from one kind of film into it, like from one subgenre into another subgenre, was satisfying, because really, like, you know, if someone is going to be, you know, like when Katie learns what she learns about that house, like, it's like this thing is going to come and it's going to fucking get her, you know. And I'll never forget the first time we screened that movie. It was at Sundance, and just that moment when Judas appears, like, it was like there was this just crazy gasping in the audience, like, what the fuck, you know?
Yeah, there's some good scares in that. Your scares are always
they're very
there's
good.
A few in The Prodigy that made James yelp in the theater.
Yeah, and I, like, you know, clearly I'm seasoned when it comes to horror movies. I don't get too worked up. He's a grizzled old been watching this shit since I can remember, but we saw a early morning for us screening of it, like at 10 a.m.
Woke us right the fuck up.
Yeah. And like there are 2 times where like I yelled aloud, and like the second time I just turned to Chelsea. I was like, I'm fucking scared. This is awesome.
Yeah.
Because like I never get scared. I'm always looking for a movie that will really scare me. And
yeah, that's great. Well, I have this really terrific memory of the second preview. There was the scene that's in the teaser trailer, which is a whole story that scare is in the teaser trailer, and like what that teaser trailer actually is, which I'll tell you guys in a second, because it's kind of interesting. Like, it wasn't intended to be a trailer, and then it got turned into a trailer. But, you know, you can see it in the teaser trailer, and it's this scene that I recreated from this Mario Bava movie called Shock, where this kid runs down the hall and then turns into this guy. And like when that scene you know, played, both previews, it had a terrific reaction. But the second preview, we had continued to edit the movie. We had like kind of dug it in a little further, and you could just tell the audience was just a little more, just kind of with this movie. And I was sitting with Jeff Bueller, who wrote the movie, and then Joe Bishara, who did the music. And when that scare happened, and it's not like the movie is like a jump scare fest, but like, it's like when that kind of thing happened, it's like I feel like it's got to happen big.
Yeah.
Like the screams were so loud, and then for like a solid 2-3 minutes afterwards, people just kept talking and laughing.
Yeah. Laugh it
to the
off,
point
yeah.
where we actually had to adjust the edit a little bit after that, just to make sure that the dialogue was going to be clear in the next scene. But I remember I turned to Joe, because Joe is the witch in The Conjuring.
Oh.
He plays the witch.
He's Bathsheba, and he's the lipstick demon.
And Insidious.
Yeah.
And like, Joe is part of 2 of the biggest jump scares in like modern movies, like the lipstick demon in Insidious, and then the witch on top of the dresser.
Oh,
yeah.
God.
Right?
Oh God, it's so
and,
scary.
And I just remember there was those screams, and me and Jeff and Joe were kind of looking at one another, like, gloating, like, look what we did. And I said to Joe, I think we beat you on top of the dresser, like, which was a great moment, because like, those, if you can do that stuff and the audience is with you, because there's a danger with jump scares because they're so overused, and any audience, but especially a horror audience, knows when it's being done unfairly. When it's cheap, and there were a lot of movies when horror kind of went mainstream again in the 21st century, where people maybe who didn't have, the business of they shouldn't be making horror movies necessarily, were making them, and they would kind of insert these cheap scares where you just get like, I would get pissed.
Yeah, it's just like a loud noise and like someone like slamming a window or something, and just like it doesn't feel like there's a good it doesn't feel earned.
Or it's like, I don't know, you can even draw a parallel to comedy where it's like you have to have a build up to a joke for it to be funny. Like if you have a scene and someone falls out of nowhere or somewhere, it's like there's no context, and it's like, well, what are we doing?
Well, and there were a lot of jumps that were kind of manufactured by people in the edit room, and like, and and you just kind of know it, but when they do work and they are designed, like that's a tool in like a horror filmmaker's arsenal. And like I learned that from, in Jaws, the head popping out of the boat.
Yeah, that's a good one.
And then An American Werewolf in London, there's a series of jump scares in that movie that really, I remember the first time I saw that movie, I was really young. I saw it when it came out. And I was probably, I wasn't too young, but I was too young to see that movie. And the jumps in that movie over the first 45 minutes were so shocking to me that I was scared. Like I didn't want to leave, but it was uncomfortable to this extent of like, it's like being on a ride that you want to get off.
Yeah.
And then I kind of started to like, it's like I started to get used to it. And then by the time I got to the end of that movie, I was like, that's one of the best movies I've ever seen.
Yeah. I'm thinking of, it's like the cut to his face where he smiles, and it's all like, I think it's when he's in the hospital.
Oh yeah, well there's a dream sequence.
Yes,
and David Nunn said that is the thing that completely fucked me up. Like, like she looks, Jenny Agutter, she looks down at him, and he opens his eyes, and there's this weird makeup on. It's just, God, it's so scary.
That's the, that part still creeps me out.
Yeah.
I think it's cool too, because that movie, I totally even forgot there were jump scares in it until you brought that up, and I think that's a sign that movie uses them effectively, because that's not what I think of when I think of that movie. It's like, oh, it's just a jump scare fest. Like, no, it's a very good movie. And
but the whole idea of a jump scare fest is kind of a recent phenomenon, right? Like it's like
you said 21st century kind of
because like they. Like when they're used well, they have the power to kind of like brace an audience. Like I remember when I saw the remake of The Ring, I saw it at the Cinerama Dome. It's like huge, screen. And there's that moment in the beginning where they're talking about the girl that they found, and they just suddenly cut to her, and it's that Rick Baker makeup.
Yeah.
And it is so shocking when that happens. You're just like completely pinned to the back of your seat for that moment. And that has this effect of like, for the next 20 minutes, you're like, okay, like what's going to happen here, you know?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like composing music, really.
Yeah. We reviewed that movie on the podcast. We had a guest on for it because it was her favorite horror movie. And I had seen that movie like years ago, but I remembered that scare. Mm-hmm. So I just sat there for the first 10 minutes like, I can't look at the TV because I know it's coming up. That girl sitting in the closet. I hate it so much.
They actually manufactured that in the edit, I think.
Really?
That was one that they shot a scene where it was like revealing her, and then they cut that scene out, and then they put that in
later.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Editing, man.
Yeah.
We both come from an editing background, so
a
lot of fondness for editors.
Good post-production,
Yeah.
So what are some of your like all-time favorite horror movies if you had to pick? I know it's hard to pick, but I'm so curious.
Well, there are the movies that kind of like, you know, destroyed my brain when I was a kid, and that, you know, I'll continue to go back and watch, you know. The first Evil Dead movie I saw, you know, in a theater, and it was a strange thing because I'd been making Super 8 movies. And I was like, I started to watch this movie, and I was like, this looks like a movie I would make.
Yeah, it looks so homemade, like homespun.
And then I learned later, you know, that they actually were Super 8 filmmakers, that then this was their first 16 film. And like, and the way that film took the audience by surprise. It was a small audience I saw it with. It was in a revival screening a couple of years after it had been released. And everyone was laughing at the movie. And then at some point, everything turned, and everyone was with this film. And to kind of witness that magic was an amazing thing. Suspiria, I saw in a theater as well when I was probably about 16 or 17 years old. It was a double feature with It's Alive, I remember. And
we just watched that.
Yeah. And It's Alive I had seen before in video, and I was like, this movie. And but you know, again, you know, before the internet, like I didn't know what this thing was. I knew it was an Italian film, and that's pretty much it. I had probably read one sentence in like a Fangoria magazine article that was probably someone being interviewed, you know, mentioning the movie. And because it was part of this festival where they were showing a lot of horror films, a lot of cult films and underground movies at this giant theater which had like a balcony and this huge screen, I went and I saw it, you know, by myself, and it was just so loud, and I just had never seen anything like that. I mean, you still had never, you know, it's still, there's nothing like it. And so that film like deeply affected me. You know, like it was, you know, it was the movie that kind of introduced me then to, and I think to a lot of people, to European horror movies, and then from there all sorts of other kind of European films. And then I do watch a lot of older horror movies. The original Cat People is one of my favorite movies.
I love that movie too.
Yeah. Talk about a great women's horror movie. Like, you know, and just this ensemble of all these interesting actors. It's short. I think it's like 68 minutes or something. It's a movie that I often turn on, like when I come home late and I'm like, I want to watch something.
Across the centuries comes this exciting story of a modern girl cursed by an ancient legend. The legend of the Cat People.
As far as the genre, you know, I think you had mentioned that Carpenter's The Thing. You know, I just watched that again. It's like this kind of irrefutable masterpiece, that film. But as like so many of the, you know, the kind of practitioners of modern horror have been passing away. You know, it's then, I think, given lots of us a chance to then take a moment and say, okay, what did these guys do? And watching Nightmare on Elm Street again after Craven died, I watched that movie twice. And I was just so amazed at that film. It's so well written, and like, despite it being so janky, like, it's such a great idea for a movie. It's so original. It's so strange. It just takes me by surprise every time I see it. That's one of my favorite horror movies. But then another person who's just passed away, George Romero, Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead, those two. And Martin is a great movie.
Mm-hmm.
I think Martin is a movie that you could see now, like playing at Sundance. It's a little bit more of, I feel like it's an intellectual,
it's long.
kind of, to appreciate it is like you feel yourself appreciating the movie.
Mm-hmm.
But Night of the Living Dead, man, like I watched that movie, I watched it. He had just passed away. I watched it again. Then I had people come over a few days later and we all watched it again. I mean, that movie is like, it's just unbelievable that they made that film. And it's like, and then it changed everything. Like, I think what you got to do the next time you watch Night of the Living Dead is just sit there and imagine what people thought, in the first few years after that film came out, where there were no zombies. Like, no one knew what that was. They knew there was a movie about like, oh, this is about dead people come back to life, right? But that film is like this freaking black hole of horror. Like, it just keeps getting more compressed, more disturbing. It's so, and then it ends in this crazy like racial thing, and you're like, oh, like, I mean, it's, to me, if I had to pick one film that kind of overall is the greatest horror movie of all time, that would be it. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of classics, but then there's also a lot of films that I love that aren't classics, as any, self-respecting horror fan loves the stuff that also is like, a three-legged dog, it's like, so, another film that I pull out every once in a while and find myself watching for no reason that I can really understand or articulate is The Car, this movie about the James Brolin late 70s movie about it's basically about the devil driving this car killing people.
What? I've never seen
I've
this.
never heard of this.
You guys should see The Car.
Evil has visited the earth in many forms. Now it returns as the car.
It was right around the same, it was probably like a year before he did Amityville Horror.
Nice.
And that movie I saw as a kid on television, and it fascinated me. And there's a weird like cult of people who are into that movie. And I know one of them is apparently Guillermo del Toro, who has a replica that he had made of the car in that film.
Oh, that's awesome.
And
He's
it's
had it made for himself.
Yeah, and he could drive it around. Like awesome. It's like,
Yes.
But it's that is an amazing, weird horror film that I'll like, any day of the week I'll turn that film on.
Oh man, that sounds so fun.
Yeah, you guys should see it.
Yeah,
it's fun.
James Brolin's got one of Hollywood's best beards.
Oh, it's so 70s.
Yeah,
it's so insanely, and it's got this whole. It's just got this. It's very serious. Like there's no humor in it, and like even him and like
fun,
the relationship in it is kind of like. It's difficult, and the guy who directed it clearly like he doesn't want to make a horror film. He's more interested in making like this drama, but he's been saddled with making this movie about a driverless car. Like it's so crazy that movie. Yeah, so
I love that.
So those are some favorites in general.
Yeah.
God, that director, it almost sounds like Larry Cohen without a sense of humor. Because Larry Cohen's movies are like often not that horror until they are. Because like we just said,
Alive.
It's Alive. It's like half of that is just kind of a melodrama.
It is like family drama.
Like the dad losing his job. That's like a large portion of that movie.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, he's such an interesting director because like he is one of those guys who just like bucked the system and made these completely unique movies. And like. And sometimes you look at the work of some of those directors like Larry Cohen or maybe even Romero in the first part of his career because, when you think about they became these icons of horror. Romero's second movie was, I think, There's Always Vanilla, which is it's like this kind of 60s, like small town melodrama.
Well, what are you going to do, Chris? I'm pregnant.
He made this series of films before he then re-embraced, being like, he's like, okay, I created this thing and I'm going to like embrace my love of horror. And it's always interesting to think about like, it's like Carpenter, like, his first like legitimately financed feature was not a horror movie. It was Assault on Precinct 13. And it draws on Night of the Living Dead, but it also draws more on Westerns.
Precinct 13, cut off, isolated in the middle of a city, as a human wave of street killers turns the night into a nightmare.
And then he kind of found his home inside of this genre, you know? But one of the things that makes his movies so great is that he's not just someone who is obsessed with horror films. Like that one of the reasons why The Thing is so great is because, you know, he's drawing from his love of Westerns as a, you know, and of Howard Hawks movies in general, and then making this crazy movie out of it. And that's one of the interesting kind of tensions in horror, in that sometimes the best people to make horror films are the ones who love them. But sometimes the best people to make horror films are the ones who just kind of come out of nowhere and just make their one horror film. And that would be like Polanski with Rosemary's Baby, Kubrick with The Shining, like Friedkin with The Exorcist. Like they came and they just completely exploded the genre. You know, they appreciated it, but they like took it apart. And that's a very different world than I guess the one that I was raised with, and I think so many of us are who just grew up just complete horror nerds.
Yeah, just
you know.
In it, yeah.
I think of recently John Krasinski in A Quiet Place because he was
what
not
a surprise, right?
a horror fan, and then that movie was great.
Or with the new Halloween, I know Jason Blum said like when he picked David Gordon Green to direct it, he was like, to be a good horror director, you just have to be a good director. And so that's why he got someone who isn't like that, like steeped in the genre, known to be like a horror person to make it. And I personally really enjoyed that movie.
Yeah. And then too, you don't have someone getting tangled up in the weeds of the Halloween continuity.
Oh, no,
They're like,
God.
nope, this is a sequel to the first one, and that's that.
You know what I did recently? You guys would appreciate that. So my friend is a director. His name's Rodney Asher, and he did Room 237. He also did this great documentary about sleep paralysis called The Nightmare, which is on Netflix, which you guys, I bet you'd really like it.
Yeah.
So we both had seen the new Halloween movie, and we were kind of talking about, we're like, well, what is the most legitimate sequel to Halloween? Is it this one, or is it like the original Halloween 2? And we ended up watching, and then we started talking about Halloween 2, and this is just, it's just the kind of thing that like horror nerds have these conversations. And I was like, wait a minute, I haven't seen Halloween 2, you know, in like, since I was like 15 years old, and it was like a bolt of lightning. I was like, I have to see Halloween 2, like tonight, you know, and Rodney got really excited. We've got to see the original Halloween 2. And like, I barely stream anything. And it wasn't on like any of the services in HD. And there's even a video rental shop really close to where I live. And they only had it on DVD, and we're like, oh, we can't do that. So there's a guy named, do you know Bill Neal? Bill is he's a horror trailer editor. He's edited all kinds of trailers, but he's like this amazing guy who has this incredible knowledge of horror movies, and he designed and, you know, cut all the trailers for like It and the Conjuring series, and like. And Bill cut At the Devil's Door for me. It was the only feature he's ever cut. It was like this favor, because he's usually off making tons of money, you know, marketing these movies, these horror films.
The It trailer,
yeah,
that like broke records, right?
Yeah,
yeah.
He did. He's doing the ones for Pet Sematary. He's like the go-to horror guy
in
Hollywood.
Yeah,
and I was like, who has Halloween 2 on Blu-ray? And then I was like, Bill. And he was so excited to he was like, oh, you haven't seen it since you got to tell me what you think. Like, it was like, you know, it's like, and that's everything about like being like a horror nerd. It was like, we're so excited. And we ended up actually we watched the original Halloween 2, because we had watched the new Halloween 2. And then we watched Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 right after. It was like this night of Halloween 2.
Man.
It was really, really funny. And I had actually never seen the Rob Zombie movie.
Which version did you watch? Do you know? It was probably the director's cut.
If it's it was 2 solid hours long. You know? Yeah. I got to say, I was really amazed at that movie. Both Rodney and I kind of went in very skeptical. And I thought that movie was really amazing. And there was a lot of really good filmmaking, but I just loved that. It was almost like the opposite of what you'd expect from any kind of remake or reboot done today. There's like no nostalgia, and like no nostalgia at all. And then the movie was like, it was like Halloween Fire Walk with Me or something. I was like,
oh my God, just visions
movie?
of like a woman with a horse. And
I mean, given we had probably had a half dozen margaritas by then, but it was, we came away fans of Halloween 2, Rob Zombie's Halloween 2. So if I ever meet him, I'll tell him.
Yeah.
Oh man.
That's such a good specific marathon. It's just all the Halloween.
It's good to do that, right?
Yeah. God, the timelines on that franchise.
I know.
Well, I lost it after Halloween 3 is an awesome movie.
Yeah, I love it.
We love Halloween 3. We have all the...
Oh yeah, we have all 3 of the masks.
They're somewhere, yeah.
So I went to, Bill had a Halloween 3 themed party where he recreated the set.
Oh no!
Of Halloween 3, and even also the hotel room with the woman with the fucked up face, when she.
Oh yeah, with the blasted open face.
Funny. Yeah, it was a Halloween 3 themed party. It was like just so next level, but like that's why I love like just horror fans in general. It's like taking it to that. You know?
Yeah. We'll one up that. Not this most recent Halloween, but the one before it. We actually have on this floor of this building 2 other apartments have our friends in them. So
like
we
friends
had,
from college.
So we had a triple apartment party. It was like an apartment crawl where our apartment was It themed. Like we had It written in blood on the shower wall.
Nice.
Just the
we
bloody
had balloons everywhere and like lights that looked like water.
Oh yeah, and it smelled like water. And then another apartment was The Thing. They blasted their AC, had fake snow everywhere. And then the third apartment was Stranger Things with like the lights on the wall. And
I love just meeting other horror fans, and it's so fun getting to sit down with someone who is a director. You have a major motion picture coming out like this week, but it's so fun to meet directors who are just, they come over and they're like, oh cool, you have so many horror toys, I want to go look at them. And it's just horror feels very egalitarian. It's very like everyone feels like we're on a level with each other, and there's an appreciation that goes like from the top to the bottom, I think, just crew wise. And like we were saying, horror is a genre where it's special in that we have makeup artists who are celebrities where we know their name. And I think that's really, really cool.
It's great. And everyone who I've met who's, doing this now as a director or as a writer or as a makeup artist, like we all have, or as a journalist, it's like we all have like a kind of the same path, like me telling the story of like the movies I saw on TV or the movies I saw in a theater. Like you could hear that story a million different ways from, any number of men and women who've had like, oh, well, the thing that got me into it was this and this and this. Mm-hmm. And that kind of, it's funny because I think in some ways the love of the genre, sometimes I wonder in my own films how much it's come through because, in those first 2 movies, I was pulling from a lot of different places. And like you're saying, like the subject of the pack doesn't necessarily, it's not always just a ghost story. It becomes something else. And then it's this kind of tortured, character in her story. When I showed At the Devil's Door at South by Southwest, I remember the person who was conducting the Q&A, one of the first things he asked me was like if I was a horror fan. And I was like, I hope you realize that, like I love this stuff, but there's this kind of, I think, a culture now, and especially because of the internet, like where, we can find one another. Right. And when I was growing up, that didn't really exist. I mean, I would go see these films like by myself, there was a lot of kind of solitary, viewings of movies. And like meeting other people who were into these films is like this revelation, I remember when I was a teenager, I actually had pen pals, and that was the only way that I could find out like people who were into like these movies, Yeah,
well, that's why stuff like Fangoria and like Famous Monsters is another big filming.
Famous Monsters, It's sort of like a previous generation, like of horror kids, like that, like monster kids, I should say. It's like, and I felt like I was taking a lot of my cues from like that generation who was like older than me, who had that love of movies monster movies, and they saw them all on television in the late 1950s into the 60s. And I think because of my age, I'm 48, like the movies that I was seeing on TV that were these old monster movies, that was kind of the last time those movies were actually on, because just a few years later, everyone had cable, programming got kind of new. And also, like, there were shows in the 80s, all of a sudden, like the Friday the 13th TV series and other horror series that actually had like gore effects and stuff like that. Like that would have been unheard of when I was a kid, you know?
Yeah.
And so things did change, and there was like this, it was something else I was talking with Joe Bashar about yesterday. It was like, it's something actually kind of nice that I felt like I was armed with, which is that I'm kind of maybe in an age group that was like the last age group where there was a physical boundary between the thing that, like, if I wanted to get that thing that would change my life, like whether it was in a bookstore, or it was at a video store, or a record store, or at a movie theater, like you had to go there.
Yeah, you had to like work.
Yeah, and
for it.
And it's not to say that it's just different now. It's it's amazing now, but those kind of experiences of going and getting that stuff was like that was life-defining stuff.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah, because like it's I feel like you'll remember that experience a whole lot more than Googling it and pressing watch this, like stream this, like when you actually, because like when I was growing up, a lot of my memories are riding my bike up to the video store, and like I had my parents tell the people who worked there it's okay for him to rent R-rated movies on his own.
Yeah.
So like I could go into the horror section and like rent
You're psyched.
Yeah, movies just based on their title or their cover,
Yeah.
cover art, and finding stuff like The Dentist and weird shit like
The
that.
Dentist.
Yeah. My dad always talks about when he was growing up, and I wonder if you watched similar stuff on TV in New Hampshire, like kind of local stuff. He grew up watching Shock Theater, which that was around, because he's from Detroit, like we're all from the Detroit area, but that was like Midwest. He'd have to like stay up late, and I don't know if he was allowed to be watching it either. Just had to he had to kind of seek that out and maybe get in trouble for staying up to watch Shock Theater, where they would curate movies and they would show like a block of them during the night. But
I mean, there was no, it's funny. It's like, because we only had like 7 channels or something like that, it was for a while, it was so few and far in between when I could see anything like this. But then what happened is, I would read the TV listings every week, and I would just look to see what was coming on that had a title, because again, no context for any of this stuff. And I'd read a title for a movie and it would be like, Destroy All Monsters. And I'd be, 7 years old, 8 years old, and it's like, what is this thing? I have to see this thing. And Channel 56 in Boston must have boosted its signal, because all of a sudden we could get this in. And I had been reading what they were showing for, probably 6 months or something. And then I finally could see one of these things. And it was a double feature, and on a Saturday afternoon. And the first one I don't remember. It was some Godzilla or Toho monster movie. And I had some context for that because I had seen these films before. But the second movie was this movie called Frankenstein Meets the Space Monster.
Frankenstein meets the Space Monster. See the terrifying invasion of the Beach Party. See a United States astro robot become a creature of death.
And with a title like that, it's like an 8-year-old had invented this thing. But here's the thing, like that movie is fucking weird. Like it's shot in Puerto Rico in black and white. It's from the mid-60s. A bunch of it is MOS. It's shot without sound, with just like kind of surf music over it. And there's
who made it?
I don't remember the name of the director, but it's like it alternates between this. It's the story of, there's no Frankenstein in it. It's a robot named Frank who has gone haywire. And then there's this these 2 aliens, which have it's almost like an Ed Wood kind of feeling movie, where these 2 aliens, it's like male female, and they're these kind of king and queen of some alien land, and they're monitoring this. It kind of, I wouldn't be surprised if they shot this other movie and then had to pad it out, and so they so there was just no context I had for what this was. And there's a scene in it when Frank picks up a hatchet or something, and it goes at someone with it, And it's off screen, but there was a great deal of violence. And it really felt like I was seeing something that was forbidden or something, you know? And then this is the other thing, you know, and it's just like, especially, you know, anyone who's watching or listening to this who's like younger, they're probably sick of hearing people saying, well, when I was younger, but back then you did not ever know if you're going to see this again.
Yeah.
Like it would just, that you just assumed you would never see it again. And then it became this thing where you'd like go on the playground and you're like, I saw this movie and it was called Frankenstein Meets the Space Monster, you know? And it was only when I got like the book, The Psychotronic Encyclopedia of Film, that listed a lot of these movies that I realized what they were. And then there was another book called Keep Watching the Skies, which is a brilliant book of about science fiction movies, the 50s and early 60s. And that book, it was so expensive, you had to go. I had to go to the library to read it, and I would just sit there, and I'm like, you know, and that's when I would find out what this movie was. You know,
God, you didn't just hallucinate.
Yeah, that was because it would. Yeah, and those movies feel so dreamlike anyway.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh man, I want to go watch that. It's
know,
weird when you were describing
watch the car
it.
and Frankenstein Meets the Space Monster.
When you were describing it, it almost sounded like the plot of Rocky Horror, like an alien king and queen monitoring
Frank.
someone named Frank who takes an axe to someone.
Sure. Oh my God.
Isn't that weird?
That's totally true. Oh my God. That's
Maybe
incredible.
maybe what's his face, Richard O'Brien.
Yeah.
Saw that late at night too and just thought he dreamed.
Yeah.
Oh man, it has been so good talking to you.
Great.
This was such a fun chat.
And I definitely recommend people check out The Pact.
Yes,
and
I'll
At the
find
Devil's
links
Door.
to your shorts and put them, I'll put them in the description, so if you scroll down, you'll...
Yeah, we never talked about the Easter Bunny movie.
Oh
shit.
God!
Oh man!
Okay, well let's do that now,
Just
because
real fast,
that shit is
'cause,
fucked up.
I mean, it's only like a 10-minute thing.
Yeah.
I just loved it. I loved it. I love the look of the Easter Bunny. Who designed the Easter Bunny look?
It was Jason Collins, he has a company called Autonomous Effects, and he did the effects for The Pact and At the Devil's Door, and that movie was the company that was putting it together, you know, approached me and said, you know, make a movie about a holiday for $25,000, and so then I had the idea to make that movie, and I wrote it for those three actors that are in the movie. Ava, the little girl who was At the Devil's Door.
Yeah.
She also actually in the Prodigy. She's not on screen, but she was part of the Loop group, which is the people who do voices for. So she's in the background.
Voices,
She's in like a fabled Loop group. I just always am very fascinated by people who get
Loop
to
groups
be in the
are
Loop
awesome.
group.
Yeah, sounds like the best.
And
gig.
they're people who are really good with improv. You know, and those that's an amazing profession. But then Petra, who played the mom in Easter, I wrote the part for her. She's an old friend and just a brilliant actress. And then, Mark Steger, who played Judas, he played the Bunny Man. And,
there's such a good physicality to him. I love it.
If you like body horror and if you like Hellraiser and you like...
we compared
he has
it
like
to
kind of a Cenobite.
Yeah,
he's got
just
a
very...
Cenobite, Easter Bunny, Jesus.
Oh, man.
I'll tell you one thing about that movie. When I finished it, before the movie was completed, like I just had like a Vimeo link, like a password protected link. And I was introduced to Patrick Stewart. And I had this, 20 minutes of hanging out with Patrick Stewart, drinking with him and his wife. And,
oh my God.
And at some point, Patrick Stewart was asking me what I did. And I was like, well, I just made this. And so he was like, I very much would like to see this. And Mark, who played Bunny Man, was like, I was trying to be Patrick Stewart in that role, So
does he also voiced the character?
Yeah, and then we kind of screwed up his voice in post. But but Patrick Stewart watched the movie, and he sent me like this really nice email, and it's almost written like you'd imagine Patrick Stewart speaking, where it was like, it was very good, very scary. Excellent work,
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
That's so good.
Your movie has the Patrick Stewart seal.
Yeah. It's so random. So random.
I would be proud to show that to Patrick Stewart. Yeah. I loved it. It's such a nice little bite size.
Right, yeah, just a nice little
It's like a shot of horror. It's great. It's awesome.
I thought you were gonna clarify, like, not that Patrick Stewart. And they're like, no, that's straight up
the Patrick Stewart.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, yeah, definitely check that out. That's on Netflix, The Holidays. And yeah, like I said, it was the third short, and then The Prodigy comes out.
Yeah, it's out this week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's out.
Go see it.
Check it out.
It's fun. I can't get in trouble for saying it's fun. I said it.
Come at us, studio.
Thank you so much. This
Okay,
was
you're
great.
welcome.
Yeah,
glad to be here.
Yeah.
So just I don't know. Catch us next week. I don't know how much of a sign off we got here.
Yeah, we'll do Twitter.
Okay, yeah. Follow Dead Meat on social media at Dead Meat James on Twitter and Instagram.
Yeah, I'm at Carebeck, CREBECC on Twitter and Instagram. And
do you have social media that you like people to follow you?
Well, for the very first time in my life, the studio asked me to join Twitter.
Yeah.
And now I'm like, man, approaching Twitter. So please follow me, and I'd be happy to. It's I think it's Ed McCarthy, director.
You just tagged me.
Yeah, and I'll put a graphic. It'll be in the description too.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Here.
Well, yeah. We'll
Cool.
get taken care of. Cool.
Yeah.
Until next week.
Yeah, I'm James.
I'm Chelsea.
This is Nicholas McCarthy.
Yeah.
And this has been the Dead Meat Podcast.